Thanks everyone, and thank you, Kanai sir. Thanks, Sham, for the opportunity to share my story. So I like the slide starts off, I think, when I first spoke to Sham and the organizers here, I was slightly out of place because this is a lot of, the entire conference is with the entire capital markets, a lot of numbers, data. But then that's when I thought, when I spoke to Sham and the organizers, they said, hey, how do we kind of share the journey of building an organization, and would that be useful for people? And if we can contrast and compare the travel and the financial services industry. So I thought I'll put together, it's been about 10 years since we started Pickyourtrial. The first 5 years we bootstrapped, after which we raised an investment from a bunch of operators and founders themselves. And after that, obviously the pandemic hit, and then we had to kind of regroup and regrow. I thought I will kind of share some of my learnings and then try and also share some of my thoughts of how I see there are similarities and how are we solving, and hopefully if that can be some kind of takeaway for some of you in your own respective units. And I also thought I'll leave the floor open for questions towards the end. So that's the agenda. Quickly, I thought also quickly introduction about me, the journey, the learnings, and like I said, similarities and solutions that I thought were there between the both industries. I did my BSc in physics from Vivekananda College. Genuinely thought that I'd do my MSc in physics and kind of get into classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, but then life had different options. I think throughout my journey, I've kind of been open to serendipity and chance. And I've never really said this is the only way forward. I started my career in Cognizant, fresh out of campus, then was lucky enough to do an MBA at IIM Bangalore, post which I got a chance to work in the financial services in Macquarie in Hong Kong. And that's when I truly realized that investment banking was not for me. I think it takes a very different kind of DNA to be doing something very intangible. I was a very tangible person. Right, and I realized that the time I spent there, I just couldn't kind of, while I didn't get a great time there, but I think my heart lied in FMCG and very tangible stuff, consumer behavior, building brands. I fortunately graduated at the peak of Lehman crisis, so which means the offer I had to work with Macquarie was no more there, but I was lucky enough to land a job with Britannia, where I sold biscuits. Then I moved from selling biscuits to selling Dettol, Harpic, right? I got a chance to work across. So the good thing about FMCG is that you get a chance to experience the entire breadth of India. So I've worked in Punjab, I worked in Pune, I worked in Gudiyatham, I worked in Udumalapet. So I think it gives you a brilliant flavor of how consumer behavior changes, how customer preferences changes over the various parts of India. And then the startup bug bit me, and I think that's when it was InMobi, which was at that point in time still not a unicorn. 2011, I joined them in the media sales team and built the entire India team out. And honestly, the idea for Pickyourtrial came through because travel is a passion. I've been to about 40 countries, and a lot of what I am today is thanks to travel and the experience I've had. And we said, how do we kind of replicate that experience to more people? And I'm talking about 2011, where predominantly group tours was the predominant mode of travel people would experience. And we said, how do we build customization, use technology? Again, one similarity is at least in financial services, there's a bunch of regulations and certifications to get started. But in travel, actually, if you see, to become a travel agent, there's nothing at all that's required. It's very, very low barrier to entry, right? All you need is an internet connection, a couple of clients, and then you get started. But scaling the business is a real challenge, right? In travel agents, you will see dime a dozen, but then to grow, because it's very, very operational, scale becomes a challenge. And I was lucky enough at InMobi to actually see the power of technology, right? The power of technology in scaling a business, firsthand I experienced at InMobi. FMCG was a distribution game, right? There's not much technology, but InMobi was where I understood the power of technology. And that kind of was the premise of, Pickyourtrial. We said, hey, travel agent business is difficult to scale, but what if we use technology, right, to kind of help build that business and scale that business? I think that's how it started. We started Pickyourtrial in October 2013 when we ideated. We said, actually, we started out as an activity marketplace. So the hypothesis was, once you're in the flight really doesn't matter what you do in the country. And every hotel room is the same once you close your eyes, right? It doesn't make a big difference. What you do in that particular city is what defines your entire experience of that vacation, right? So we said we will be an activity marketplace, and 2013 was the heyday of marketplaces, right? You come from IIM Bangalore, you think you've nailed it all, you can go and raise money very easily. There was, Myntra, Jabong, ShopClues, bunch of marketplaces being found at that point in time. And we said we'll try and do the same thing and replicate it on the travel side. Learned a lot. We had to pivot. The entire premise was, when was the last time you did something for the first time? Spoke to friends. Everybody said it's a big pain point. But then when we launched, right, when we actually invested money to build out the entire website, and then we kind of ran it for about 2-3 months, there was no real traction. Customers were not paying anything for it. And then when we spoke to customers, we realized, while yes, everybody wants some solution there was fatigue. There was no hook to book, and then we pivoted into a full-scale vacation brand. And that's when we had to pivot from a marketplace. So in a marketplace, you never really have to worry for the experience because you're connecting a seller and a buyer, right? But the moment you become a full-fledged vacation service provider, the brand becomes very, very critical, and you have to own the entire experience. So if your flight is delayed, the brand gets negative. If your baggage is lost, the brand is what takes a hit, right? So we had to pivot from that activity marketplace to a full-fledged travel experience. But the learning was to stay connected to the customers. So I think knowing what customers want and going back and building the business from customers, I think was the biggest learning for us here. So the fundamental problem was this, right? Is there an easy, fun way to plan trips, right? And we said, how do we solve for that? And that's where we said, we will use technology to kind of create itineraries, right? You book them at one click, and then you have a full stack experience with us through concierge, right? Visa success, everything put together. And how do we infuse technology in every aspect of that, right? That's the way we thought about it. And till date, it's slightly outdated slide, but we've close to about 5 million itineraries that we have created on the platform. Our NPS score continues to be 62. And the whole thing about building a brand is about customer experience, as all of you would agree. So we're very, very fanatical about customer experience. I think one of the earliest lessons I learned was that in the service industry, there is always going to be some kind of a break, right? It's close to near impossible to not have any breaks. But how well you recover, service recovery is the most critical aspect, right? When something goes wrong, do you own up? And do you actually go all out to solve the customer pain point, right? At that point in time is something that we try and continuously imbibe in. And that kind of, I think, has helped us not just have this NPS, but also keep our customer acquisition cost low, right? Keep our repeat very, very high, right? And that's the way we've built the business. And this actually happened yesterday. Yesterday, Pickyourtrial was awarded the best outbound tour operator. Outbound is international holidays, right? So against the likes of Make My Trip, SOTC, Thomas Cook, right, which are stalwarts in the domain, we were recognized as the best holiday brand in India. And I think a lot of what I'm going to share in the next couple of slides is learnings, is what I think is helping us execute consistently and get such acclamations. So I think the first thing I've learned is culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think some of the best laid strategies don't make sense if you have the right culture. And from my own experience, culture is what's tolerated, right? In our workplaces, in whatever we do, small team, big team, right? Do we actually tolerate very simple things? What time do people log in, right? How do you write emails? It's not the big things that really matter. I think we focus a lot on the big things, strategy, right? How do you plan? How do you invest? But then where I think the gap becomes is how do you execute, right? And culture defines execution, right? The culture you build, for example, this entire event, it's a lot about the culture of how they've built it. There's a timer, people want to run it on time, right? There was a prep call, people wanted to that I'm prepared, understanding the audience segmentation, right? So the execution is also defined by the culture that the team has put it together, right? it's exhausting. It's like, I keep telling my team, it's like, raising children. It's extremely exhausting. You have to repeat the same thing again and again and again. But then if you don't do that, I think eventually the culture gets built will actually be very detrimental, especially if you're building a very long term. If you're building an institution, it's two kinds of entrepreneurship in my mind. Either you kind of build to flip and sell and you continue to be a serial entrepreneur, or you want to build an institution. If you're building an institution, then I think culture becomes very, very critical, right? Very large brands, Tata, Tanishq, right? Consumer brands, which I hold dear respect, 100+ years, Unilever. I think culture is very, very crucial, and that's something that we have learned over the last couple of years. Moving forward, I'm a huge sports fan, so I think there's a lot of analogies on. So there'll be a lot of analogies. Sports, movies are some of my key themes. So it's something I learned. I wanted to be like all of us growing up, I wanted to be a cricket player as well, but didn't work out. But the first thing the coach tells you is where your eyes go is where the balls go, right? So I mean, if you're keeping your eyes to the ground, the ball goes in the ground. If you lift your head up, the ball goes up, right? And that's pretty much how business also runs, right? Your vision defines where the company is actually going to head, right? And from the vision, it's about what you measure, right? So the metrics you measure, are you measuring and optimizing for short term, or are you measuring and optimizing for long term, right? I think there was an Axis Bank, the person was presenting, right? At 60 years, what's the return? At 10 years, what's the return? At 20 years, what's the return? So what are you optimizing for? What is the metrics you're tracking internally in the organization? What are the metrics you're rewarding your people with, right? All of that starts from the vision, right? So getting your vision very, very clear and keeping that clear in terms of measuring the metrics, right? Are you tracking, for example, our frontline concierge team has zero limits on the losses that they can take. So what I mean is, let's say, for example, as a customer, you've booked a trip with us, and then you go in, and then you realize there's an error in the booking, right? Is the frontline team, you're there for only 2 days in a city, right? At max 2-3 days, you're there in a city. Right? Is the team going to try and take 5 hours to solve the problem and optimize for the loss? Or are they going to take 30 minutes to solve the problem and not optimize for the loss, right? So that's where the vision, the metrics, right? So when the metric is loss, then they'll try and optimize for the loss. But when the metric is customer experience scores or brand loyalty scores, they'll try and optimize for the brand loyalty score and not really worry about the loss, right? So I think getting that clarity and driving that metrics down the team has really helped us grow the business. This is actually Alexander Fleming. I don't know if you've heard the story. The way he discovered penicillin, or even, let's say, Archimedes, Eureka, right, is a lot about gut, right? And somewhere I think it's a very, I don't know, I might be very wrong in sticking my neck out and saying this. While I said, yes, metrics is important, I think there's too much of westernization of metrics and numbers that kind of take away the internal muscle memory that we have. All of us have experience of building businesses. All of us have years of experience of understanding our respective fields of expertise, right? Sometimes we have to trust our gut. We have to genuinely trust our gut and say, I like to believe gut is muscle memory, right? And that muscle memory keeps getting built. And especially if you're building a team, if you're growing a business by hiring people, hiring is so much of a gut call. You spend 40 minutes, 60 minutes, 80 minutes, 2 days at max, right? You have to make a decision within that time. And I think not trusting your gut and trying to, everything has to be data driven. I think there has to be a fine balance, and I think our Eastern philosophy lends a lot more to, like, for example, I keep giving this example to my team. The way I have seen my mom cook or my grandmom cook or how we cook, there is no cookbook, there is no recipe. I mean, when you go outside India, Europe, everything is measured. They have a measuring weight, they have cups to measure, right? Everything goes by the cookbook, right? But then we just don't do that. We just go with our intuition, our feel, right? Like, or chitti guy, they say, right? I mean, how do you measure what is a chitti guy? It's just so much of our entire upbringing is on such finer aspects. And I think once I was with Sridhar Vembusai, I had an opportunity, and very interestingly, he said, we had a 2-day session, and I was talking to him about the same thing, about metrics and how do you build an organization, how does he run Zoho and all of that. And then he said, he'll ask you a question. How were the last 2 days? If I had to go back home and your mom asks you, how were the last 2 days? What will be the metric? I said, no, I'll just say it was good, I learned something. He said, you have to just build that. He just said that people have to feel that it was good, people have to feel that it was enriching, and there's no metric that can track that. And that's where your gut and entire decision making really comes into play. And I think as the stakes get higher, right, it's a lot more difficult to take gut calls, right? As stakes get higher, there's a very beautiful saying, nobody was ever fired for buying an IBM, right? IBM just built such a large brand that the easiest thing to do is a standard problem even with brand managers in very large companies. Axe has the same template. The same template of Axe ads runs for like 20 years. No brand manager wants to take a risk and say, I will look at a different way of Axe, because 3 years I'll be Axe brand manager, then after 3 years I'll become a portfolio manager, right? But then that risk taking, if it doesn't happen, innovation dies down. And that's where I think your gut really helps you take some of those high conviction risks, right, which is very critical for success in a business. Moving, I have about 7. I don't know if you've recognized the song. Sorry, it's a very Tamil reference. But this is a song where it talks about, கையில் கொஞ்சம் காசு இருந்தால் நீதான் அதற்கு முதலாளி, கழுத்து வரைக்கும் காசு இருந்தால் அதுதான் உனக்கு முதலாளி, right? So I think sometimes what happens is when we want to build businesses, there's so much focus on tools and what process you're having, and suddenly that constrains you, right? That constrains your ability to move fast, that constrains your ability to think, that constrains your ability to execute, and we get so stuck up with tools and process, right? And I think there's a in a telco, he used to say, there's a process for making a process, right? I mean, it becomes so large, right? Then you're just so caught in this kind of thing. Then you lose everything that you started out with, right? The David versus Goliath, your nimbleness, your ability to move fast, your ability to take quick decisions, everything goes for a toss because you're just so caught up with tools and processes, right? And I strongly believe data, I mean, whatever data all of you have, right? You can just flip, slice, dice, and then you can tell any story. Data, if you torture it well, it can tell whatever story you want to tell, right? Everybody said COVID vaccines were great. That's what they want to do. Now today, there are studies that say vaccines increase the risk of heart disease and brain. I mean, there's just no end to how you can play with data. And I think that's where you have to, again, combining with the gut, right? There is, at some point, you hit decision paralysis, right? And then as you keep growing, as the stake is becoming higher, everybody wants to safeguard their own ways of working. And how do we break that culture? How do we, if you have to build something very, very large or of sizable scale, we have to let people fail. We have to let people continue to be nimble, agile, and move fast. And I think that's another learning that we have had, is that a process is actually a means to a solution. It's not the solution, right? Sometimes people think by putting a process, they've solved something, but actually process is not the solution, right? Incentives self-align if you don't take the effort to align. All of us have experienced this, right? The stop line is there, right? And people will just go and stop behind the person who's the farthest from the stop line. Because if they get caught first, I don't get caught. Right? Very simple. So this is very, very human behavior, right? Humans, by default, we are lazy, right? It's a proven thing that we have a lazy brain. And if you take Newton's first law, it speaks about inertia. All of us like to be in a state of rest or uniform motion, right? Unless we have an external force acting on you, you're just happy. Your mom has to wake you up, right? There has to be a meeting at 8 a.m. Something has to give that external impetus. Otherwise, we are very, very happy being where we are. And that's where having the right incentives help change behavior, right? Having the right incentives guide us and help us to move in a direction where otherwise we are just happy, just where we are. And that, I think, combined with metrics, combined with the culture, right? If we incentivize the wrong things, for example, in our industry, if we incentivize the team for margins, right? Then they will try and sell products which are very high margin, or they might overcharge the customer, right? They might add buffers. So many things can happen, which can then cost a post-purchase dissonance, right? The customer, all he has to do is just go to the resort and say, hey, what's the price? And then they will discover that, why did I pay so much, right? And then you've lost the customer for life. And not just that, the customer then go tell this to everybody he knows, right? So how do you not incentivize the team for margins, right? But then incentivize them for customer experience or repeat, right? And that defines the kind of execution, the kind of culture that we have. 6, I mean, this is my favorite. I want to be a movie director at some point in time. This is, I think, the best, at least in the generation I grew up in. Simbu was kick-ass, right? Think about Simbu. His father was a very, very accomplished cinema person. He started acting at a very young age, right? So he was in the industry for very young. 2003, that was the guy. It was the peak of his career, right? And Manmadan was just rave, right? And there was Dhanush, 2004. I mean, nowhere near any kind of charm, which is what you will associate with a industry movie professional, right? Purely just discipline and process, right? There is how much ever gifted we are. I tell my team, you have to commit on the input process, right? Anybody you speak to in the industry, they will rave about how Dhanush is on time, right? Dhanush is extremely methodical about what he does and delivers again and again and again, right? And this is pretty much, if you listen to Dhoni also, he says the same thing, right? They focus on the input and the outcome is never really going to be in our control, right? And I think COVID was a great learning for us. Right now we're going through a crisis in Maldives. All happened was Modi put a photo and then somebody said something about that photo. And from about 30,000 passengers a month into Maldives, they're sitting at about 6,000 passengers into a month, right? I mean, so many things are beyond our control and you just have to focus on the input, right? We continue to say we only focus on what we can control and outcomes will always, again, a very Eastern philosophy. If you read scriptures, they continue to talk about why you cannot really obsess about outcomes and you can only control what is in your inputs. And that's something that we continue to try and do. And I think for all of you, you go through that day in and day out because you just don't understand why the market behaves the way it behaves, right? So I think you guys will have this a lot more day in and day out from a palpitation perspective than our business. But I think we try and ensure that we continue to do what is right from an input perspective, what we can control. For example, if a customer logs in, do we call the customer within 15 minutes, right? That's a pretty much input metric. That's in our control. You can call the customer within 15 minutes. Does that give them a good experience, right? So do we send the itinerary then within 2 hours, right? So when we continue to measure what's in our control and we continue to improve that, eventually we believe that things will align and you'll be able to execute better, right? This is what I thought I'll try and talk about from a similarities perspective. When I reflected when I was coming here, I said, hey, I mean, how does it work? And luckily, my wife also works in this industry, so I could soundboard with her. And I've also, I mean, it's a very easy industry to, at least from an external perspective, all of us are consumers, right? I think both the industries are extremely fragmented. In both businesses, sound advice is very, very key, right? But unfortunately, in this business, there's also very, very strong margin squeeze, right? For example, in travel, airlines used to pay very high commissions, hotels used to pay commissions, right? Now there's a very significant margin crunch that you just squeezed out on margins on all sides, which means how do you charge customers, right? Both of them are very, very highly regulated, right, in some sense, and it's a continuously changing regulation. Every year something the government does. For example, last year the government put a TCS rule. I mean, everybody, 20% TCS was just very, very high on the industry, right? So I think that's another similarity I could think of. Technological disruption is real. I mean, all of you would have experienced it. It's just not consumer technology like ChatGPT or any of those aspects, right? But fundamental industry is moving. Industry is moving from a technology perspective, the way markets are working, right? The entire speed of if you pick up algo trading, right? In the travel side, the entire recommendation engines, right? Your overall AI models. I think that's another similarity I could think of. But the beauty is, in both of these markets, is that they're extremely fragmented, but also very, very large, right? So when it's an extremely fragmented, large market, I think, going to the next slide, the threat of competition is actually a myth. I think we tend to over-obsess about competition in an extremely large, fragmented market. I genuinely don't believe competition is real. I mean, Oyo is a classic case. They've raised $6-7 billion, right? And they just didn't go anywhere. The beauty, and I think sometimes Make My Trip is extremely lucky because Cleartrip, Yatra, Oyo, nobody's managed to give Make My Trip a real chase for its money, right? Nobody in India has managed to execute well, and that's also speaks great about them. But in such a large industry, I think, for example, we're almost 55% of Make My Trips holiday numbers, right? So I don't think competition matters in our industry. As long as we continue to deliver sound advice and create value, I don't think competition is ever going to be a problem. Right advice is extremely valuable, and that's where hiring and training, I think, are very critical. We invest a lot in hiring and training people, and I think it's pretty much true for the financial services industry also, right? Getting people trained on products, on knowledge, on destinations, right, and customer experience is very, very critical. Getting technology on board from a service delivery perspective, consistencies is, I think, another solution that we have tried, and it can either be a personal brand that you want to build. Some of you could just want to build a personal brand, but even there, investing in technology is very critical because that's when the consistency of the experience for the customer exists, right? I think the good thing about, and after 10 years, what I've realized is that actually regulation at some point starts working in your favor, right? When things keep changing so fast, every year something new comes up, it's very difficult for somebody new to come in and keep adapting, right? The systems, processes, the entire ability to handle change, right, is not very easy. And that's something that works in our favor, I like to think. On the margin squeeze part, what I have realized is supply is where the key is. So for your case, maybe getting the right products, getting into the right sections of products is very critical. From our side, we have to continue to invest in getting better supply because the Indian consumers, I don't know how many of you recently, Uber CEO, Dara, spoke saying the biggest problem in India for Uber is that the Indian consumer wants the best of service but is paying the least, right? And that's never going to change. I think that's something we have to make peace with. And despite that, how do we deliver value and advice, I think is key. I think from a summary perspective, using technology, having great supply, and focusing on customer experience is where I think we have grown, and I could sense there are similarities here. And with respect to competition, there's this quote by Seneca, who's a Stoic philosopher, says we always suffer more in our imagination than in reality. And I think that's pretty much true for competition. We over-obsess about competition, and I think not doing that and just focusing on what we are good at and continuing to do what we are good at, I think is what has worked for us. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time. This is something that I want to leave with, and this is what I tell my team. Overnight success always takes years, and gratitude for Rossiter. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Hari.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful presentation. We can see a stoic mind behind your venture.
I would love to, if it's okay with you, open the floor for questions if anybody has questions. We have 3 minutes.
If you're going to stay, a lot more people will connect with you.
I will. But if there's any immediate questions, 3 minutes, I've saved up time.
I have a question, so I'm going to take it quickly. So you mentioned about gut, right? So, and we've been reading a lot of articles about gut health. So is gut health related to making better decisions? Is my question. Do you have answers to that?
Gut health is pretty much the most important thing for us to stay healthy. Personal experience, I have gut, so I think getting very good gut health is very critical for you to stay healthy. And a healthy mind
is different, but can I improve my decision making?
I think yes. I think I was going to get there. I think staying healthy is the first way to make sound decisions because then your overall physique and body, everything works. Body and mind are very well connected. Food. There's a beautiful book called Outlive. If any of you are interested, you should pick that book up. It talks about how the human body can be tuned, if I have to say, right? That at 60, 70, my biggest fear, I keep telling my wife, is that we should buy Apollo Hospital stocks because we're anyways going to spend so much money on healthcare, we'd rather at least take the upside of the stock, right? But at 60, when we have made all the money, do we have the health to travel? I think that's the key thing we have to focus on.
Thank you.
Hari, very good presentation. Just one question which is relevant to our industry also. Customization, standardization. How do you make the choice? We are struggling with that choice ourselves. So is customization more important, or if you want to go scale or you're looking at scale, standardization more important?
So very, very valid question because we keep debating internally also, Raji. So I'll give you a very honest answer about this, right? So I think I was just talking to Raji right now. As she'd gone to Greece recently, right? And if you look at where she's been to Athens, she's been to Santorini, right? Which is standardization, right? Most people going to Greece for the first time want to do Athens and Santorini, right? But for her, customization was a smaller town called Naxos, right? So I think we tend to, I mean, in all honesty, and please don't quote me, Indians, right from very early on, this Patel shot concept was there in travel, right? So everybody wants to go to a Patel shot. There's no person who will go to Europe or Paris and not go to Eiffel Tower, right? So what we try and do is that there's certain bit of standardization that all of us like, right? Because there's this fear of social approval, right? But then you give them the control to feel as though they are personalizing it. I think that mix, that's why technology really helps, right? Because if I have to do it manually, then you just need more and more people. So we give people the power to feel that they are in control, but more often than not, 80% it's standardized. Because you're going to a country for the first time, you're buying a product for the first time, and especially in your industry, nobody wants to risk. Right? How much ever people might say, you have to mix between here and there, but most people want to play it safe, right? And so giving them that choice of illusion, choice is always an illusion, right? Between those in power and those who are not, right? But I think we have to give that as my sense.